It never fails that if anything comes out of Studio MAPPA, everybody's going to be all over it. Yes, an interview came out today from MAPPA CEO Manabu Otsuka, and people are losing it. Every social media is just chiming about this. Quotes everywhere. And so I thought I would check out the actual interview and go through it with you guys, and let's see what was actually stated in the interview and kind of analyze it a little bit. I honestly had a lot of fun looking into the last one that he did, which he kind of talked about doing the 100% investment into Chainsaw Man itself and how it was successful, but not really successful as much as he wanted it to. So let's dive into it. But yeah, this interview was posted on natalie.mu, and it's a series of interviews for this animation studio Chronicles they're doing. This 8th interview features, obviously, Manabu Otsuka of MAPPA. The interview opens up with him saying that originally MAPPA was created because Maruyama wanted to produce some works. One of them was In This Corner of the World. At the time, Maruyama also planned to animate Kids on the Slope for the Noitamina slot. The director of Kids on the Slope, Shinichiro Watanabe, asked me if I was interested in working on the production. Until then, I had been working at Studio 4C, a studio that was focused on theatrical animation, but I wanted to experience working on TV series in order to improve my skills as a creator. Moreover, Noitamina at the time was at the forefront of animation for adults to watch, so it had my interest. The timing was right, and Kids on the Slope led me to join MAPPA from its inception. Yeah, for those who don't know, essentially in Japan, you obviously have a bunch of different TV broadcast channels and whatnot and different services. And Noitamina was this one late night block that just had a lot of very creative anime in it. This wasn't like your typical harem shows. This wasn't your kids shows. This was strictly anime that was focused and directed towards adults. So they had a lot more adult themes in them, and they were a lot more theatrical. I was grateful that Maruyama allowed me to work freely as soon as I joined MAPPA, specifically in the area of company management. At 4C, I was only thinking about productions themselves, but at MAPPA, I became interested in how I can raise money and how to work in order to run the animation studio. I didn't think I was to be president, but as a producer, I started to understand the company's numbers when I was working on the production. He says, as I began to understand the various numbers related to studio management, my interest turned into how far can we grow as a studio and continue to exist as a company. So when Maruyama asked me to be president in 2016 and I accepted the position, my first priority was to survive and continue to create. This was not within the small framework of the animation industry, but as a company. When we thought about what we should do to achieve this, the first thing we needed to do was to increase productivity. This is the part where I think everybody is obviously going to raise a stink on. Because again, MAPPA's, because it's such a big studio, because it's such a massive studio, because it's creating things that people are really loving, it's being pretty much put under the magnifying glass of everybody. And yes, with a lot of production, with a lot of really short schedules, there's a lot of people that are being overworked, and then people are angry about it. Despite the fact that everybody's consuming all the stuff that MAPPA's doing, everybody's eating it up. We don't like that it's doing this. And so it becomes that conundrum that's being created by MAPPA in that people love it, but they hate it. What it's so far indicating to me right here is Otsuka's talking about how he went from essentially seeing how these productions are done, how the actual management of the company is done, and he's trying to build it up as a company, rather than letting it remain as just a studio. I kind of went into this with the whole thing with the 100% investment of Chainsaw article that I read before, and this idea that Otsuka has a different mindset than most studio management. Most studios themselves are essentially sitting down there waiting for something to come to them. Somebody brings them the money and says to produce this one thing. And then they produce that thing and they make nothing from it. They're just a cog in the system of they're just creating the stuff. They're being paid this measly amount, they're producing the stuff, and then whatever profits goes back to whoever gave them money in order to produce it. He didn't like that. He doesn't like that. He's thinking it from a company standpoint rather than just a studio standpoint. He wants to create a company. He wants MAPPA to be this whole encompassing system. And it seems like right here, he's sort of indicating that idea of, yeah, in order to do that, we just push. Already right here in 2016, it seems like he's indicating that he was already in that mindset, that this isn't normal for anime studios. So he was already thinking broad from this point. And this is where we start to get in that realm of things that are difficult for people to really stomach. Right here, he's being very clear that our idea here is to just produce, increase productivity, keep turning in the money. And that is, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, on the backs of animators that are not going to get paid much for that. In order to increase those profits and to increase that productivity, people get cut from it. He says that it was difficult to catch up to the quality of Kyoto Animation and Utofable in this short period of time. And it was too late for MAPPA to try to reach the level of 20 or 30 years. And he kind of mentioned that in the last interview as well, this idea that you can already see it in the idea that this MAPPA has grown to being such a massive studio in such a short span of time. Other companies like, yes, Kyoto Animation and Utofable have been around for much longer. They're trying to speed up that process. They're trying to get big quick. He says, so we had to take a different approach than the studios that were ahead of us. So we thought about how we could produce a lot and gain experience while maintaining the high level of quality, and at the same time brand the studio and join the race with the top studios in the shortest amount of time possible. Now here's where I get a massive question mark. And again, I don't like to knee-jerk reaction with a lot of this kind of stuff. I know the easiest route here is to say, oh my gosh, he's literally trying to create a massive company on the backs of the animators. How I like to look at this is wonder how much of this is just his decision and the actual producers' decisions, the heads of the company itself, the CEOs. Is this just them going, okay, we need to work to death these people in order to grow big. We're going to pull in really creative talent and force them to kind of turn this stuff out quickly. We need to produce a lot for cheap and get bigger. Because there's no way they could produce all this stuff in such a short span of time and make a lot of money. They're obviously not going to make much. And sadly, again, a lot of that has to do with them just kind of using animators, making them turn a lot of cuts and gain notoriety. It kind of turns into those things where it's like a difficulty here in the idea that, yes, the animators don't have to work for MAPPA. But for some reason, they keep doing that. That's always been the massive question mark. Why do animators keep going to MAPPA? It's obvious from everybody's perspective, MAPPA is an evil company and overworks people. But why do they keep going there? Yes, on one hand, it's the idea that there's nowhere else to go, and maybe they pay well enough for what they're asking for. Maybe it's just guaranteed work. The other side of it might be a fact that they're just trying to gain notoriety. If you want to rise up in the world of animation, you have to get your name out there. And doing really amazing cuts, or maybe it's just a passion for the project they're working on, might push people to take that low pay and those work conditions in order to get in there. Again, the question is, why do people keep going to MAPPA? And again, I think it's because notoriety. MAPPA is big right now, and people want to get their name out there. And yes, in a lot of cases, it is the ladder of getting successful. And the idea that you start out here as being just an animator, you become an animation director, key artist, whatever, and eventually you get to those higher jobs that actually do pay well, which is like the directing and stuff like that. But it is kind of interesting him right here stating that he wanted to be a KyoAni. He wanted to be Utofable. Now, we don't hear, at least I don't remember much, we don't really hear often that Utofable has like bad work conditions or whatever. Kyoto Animation, they have been pretty much the doll of the anime community. Like, there is so much positivity out of their studio. There is so much love out of their studio. Now, eventually one day we can find out that yes, Kyoto Animation is just as bad as MAPPA. They're just as bad as every other studio. But typically, like, of all the studios, like I said, MAPPA is pretty much like all other studios. Most other studios are bad work conditions, less pay, and all that kind of stuff. It's just Kyoto Animation, and again, we don't hear much chirps out of Utofable, are these kind of studios that are kind of the oddballs, but they're still producing high quality. They're producing stuff at low amounts of product, but at high quality. MAPPA is trying to produce high quality with high quantity, which is technically the reason probably why they're seen as so horrible, is because these short time spans that they're actually giving the animators to produce this stuff. He goes on to say, we were already aware that we wanted to be in the race when we were making Terror and Resonance, Rage of Bahamut Genesis, and Garo when it aired in 2014. However, it was complicated because we didn't have any hits of our own and didn't know how to make them. After that, we continued to make films through various trial and error process, and first one that bore fruit was Yuri on Ice. Yes, that got massively big. As well as In This Corner of the World, which screened in 2016. The success of those two titles has such an impact that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it changed the fate of MAPPA, and it clearly changed the way people saw us. Yeah, I think that definitely was the point that put them on the map. Now, me personally, I was actually into the studio before then, but yeah, for sure, the greater public, and yes, the non-anime fans, Yuri on Ice, In This Corner of the World, that got the general public, and that's what put them on the map. He said, especially within this corner of the world, we were able to achieve results such as winning domestic and international animation awards for the film. Frankly speaking, it was such a great achievement that it came too soon for the company, and we felt a lot of pressure to achieve the same kind of result afterwards. I think that's kind of one of those kind of stains to companies like, probably the best example would be like Ghibli, the idea that everything they make has to be amazing. And that's got to be a lot of stress for a company to have those same results, because the next thing you produce, it has to be the same quality. And we've had several cases where a good example is probably Dogakobo for me. I love that company. For the longest time, I thought they were the greatest company for just kind of cute girls doing cute things, slice of life type shows. And then suddenly out of nowhere, they started producing a couple of animation TV series that were like, what is this? like what happened to the studio? They were always like subtle quality. Like you could see subtleties in their animation that made it come alive. And again, I think a lot of that is putting that expectations on the company itself to always produce the same thing, when in actuality, the production schedules and the amount of money being put into the project is going to be different every time. He goes on to say it was good for us to be able to produce a hit film, but the amount of money coming into the studio from a simple outsourced production work was very small. And this is where we get that problem that he was already kind of talking about back there. This idea that we get a hit. It's doing amazing. It's getting awards. But the studio's not getting anything. MAPPA isn't getting anything for this. He says what I mean by less is that the studio's income was small in relation to the overall business scale of the production. I felt that if we did not improve this situation, it would be impossible for us to survive and grow strongly as a company. So from 2016 onward, we aim to maintain an environment where we can continue to produce animation while focusing more on production conditions that would bring in more money to the studio. And around 2018, we started other business besides animation productions, such as rights and events. Again, this is where things shifted. And again, this is what I talked about in that interview that he did before about the Chainsaw Man 100% investment thing. And the idea that he's trying to make it into a company that is all-encompassing. That's the reason why Kyoto Animation works. Kyoto Animation is producing very few shows. So why are they making so much money? Why is their budgets in these projects so great? It's because they own most of the properties they're producing. They're making merchandise. They're doing things outside of just producing an anime. And he's seen that. And he's trying to do that, although he's producing too much. And that's probably where they're failing at. Because I know this is a harsh reality that people don't want to hear. I know, this is kind of one of those moments where I always like to hear both sides, and I like to understand what a company is thinking. And in a lot of cases, that often leads to me saying something that I think people don't want to hear. It's the uncomfortable truth that people don't want to believe. They want to assume malicious. They want to assume greedy, which, yes, is honestly probably at the end of the day is going to be truth here. No matter how you look at it, MAPPA is a company. They're going to be greedy. They want money. That's what companies do. But what MAPPA is doing is creating high quality animation with most likely the same budgets that every other studio is getting, but yet making lower quality stuff. That's, again, what he has already seen at this point. He already seen it at this point. We want to be big. We want to be like Kyoto Animation, but with the current system where we're taking measly amounts from companies, we're wanting to create something like that. And that's where the problem lies. The problem lies is that like every other studio, like every other animation production, like every other animation, they get paid a certain amount. And that certain amount, unfortunately, only goes so far. And this is what I was arguing for the longest time, is that these studios need to ask for more money. But I think back here, they weren't able to do that quite yet. And I think they're able to do that sort of now. When you want to produce something like Jujutsu Kaisen, when you want to produce something like Yuri on Ice, when you want to produce something like Hell's Paradise, it costs a lot of money to make sure that everybody is paid for what they do. The problem that we always hear out of the animation industry as a whole, and yes, a lot out of MAPPA, is that these animators are having to produce all these cuts, but they're being paid pennies. If MAPPA were to turn out the quality that they're being paid for by the production committee, you'd have pretty much Jujutsu Kaisen looking like any other anime. Just no values, just mostly stills, action lines, sliding stills, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, in order to produce what we're getting, which everybody loves, they're not getting paid more to do that. So thus people are getting paid less per cut to produce something that we think looks amazing. And it ends up becoming what most animators do is a passion project. They do it because they love it. They want to create cool looking things. And again, they want notoriety, so they're taking that low pay. That's a sad reality that unfortunately most people don't want to hear. Is that I think what he sort of realized right here, Manabu did, is that we want to create what Kyoto Animation is doing, high quality, but we're not quite there yet, that we're still getting paid pennies to do it. And my hope is that eventually his goal is to get where they're comfortable paying good money for their animators. But I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. I wish somebody would ask him. But yeah, it is kind of funny to think that he's talking about that they're focusing on production conditions. Is this idea that we're trying to bring in more money by essentially pushing too much animation from each individual and paying less? Trying to figure out how they can get more for their money, essentially. But I do give him credit here. The one thing I can give him credit here for is the idea of diversifying. Getting outside of just being a company that just makes animation. Make other ways of bringing revenue in. That way you can eventually produce your own stuff. He goes on to say, until then, I was one of the young people in the industry. So I was following the customs of this is the way it's done, or following the trend of follow the right path. But nothing will change if I continue to say it can't be helped. And yes, most people here are probably going to say, then stop underpaying your animators and having terrible working conditions. But again, I do like the idea that he is an outside thinker. His idea behind, fully producing Chainsaw Man was the idea of going, well, I did the work to research how do I produce an anime? How do I get the funding to do this? How do I own the rights and all that kind of stuff? All this stuff that's done by production committees, I want to do all that stuff so we don't have to have the production committee. Even in a market trend where the business environment surrounding the studios is getting tougher and tougher, the idea was born that we should take our own risks in order to realize such things as how to make animation that people enjoy. Good on him for focusing on creating stuff that people like. The article goes on to say that yes, this example of this coming to fruition is MAPPA investing 100% into Chainsaw Man. He says, I read the original story of Chainsaw Man and was very much attracted to it. So I decided to take a challenge in adapting it into an anime. We have a director named Makoto Kimura, who used to work at a TV station before moving to MAPPA. He and I created a plan together to propose to Shueisha. Kimura was a producer that I work with Terror in Resonance and other projects, and now he is in charge of thinking of such business schemes and proposing them to me. Kimura joined us right at the right time, when I felt like we needed someone in the studio who could build a good relationship with the platform side of the animation distribution and come up with appropriate business schemes. MAPPA is what it is today thanks to cooperation with such people, including those outside the company. This is interesting because this is the empty gap that he didn't talk about previously. Again, previously he talked about how he wanted to essentially learn how the production committees work. Rather than wait for them to bring me money and tell me what to produce, I want to do what they're doing. How do they know who to go to? Who do you call at Shueisha in order to get a license for a product? How do you get those things put together that end up eventually going to the animation studios? I want to do all that. This guy essentially opened all those doors. He told him who to talk to in order to get the license. He showed him who to talk to in order to propose these ideas of making an animation and allowing them to make all that profit rather than going to a production committee. Again, all the flaws of MAPPA aside, he's doing essentially what I want all these studios to do. Not the bad work conditions or whatever, but essentially becoming the production committee. Yes, it's difficult because you need to have a lot of money to invest in it. A lot of money gets put into these production committees. And unfortunately, a lot of it doesn't go down to the studios. But if he can figure that out, he can cut out that middleman and get a lot of that profits to them and hopefully improve their working conditions. But yes, you can argue that they're putting the cart before the horse in a lot of cases because they're pushing the animators in order to achieve that point if they ever decide to fix that issue. He continues saying, first of all, it was difficult to produce an animated film based on the work as well received as Chainsaw Man, regardless of whether or not they had a 100% stake in the project. Of course, there was things that went well, and there was parts that didn't meet expectations of the fans. I accept that, honestly. And I do not think the production committee's system is a bad thing, and I have always had a sense that anime production is made possible through the cooperation of various companies. However, working on Chainsaw Man solely on my own allowed me to experience firsthand how difficult it was for a single company to take on various tasks and responsibilities. It was a great learning experience. This is kind of one of those weird things where you're wondering if he's saying this because he doesn't want to burn bridges with production committees going forward, because the whole thing with Chainsaw Man wasn't as big of a success as he wanted it to be. But yes, he is pointing out the idea that the production committee isn't just a bunch of people that are saying, make this, here's a wad of cash, and we're going to make the rest of the money. There is things that the production committee itself is doing. And I think a lot of that has to do with legalities and licenses and stuff like that. Then you, of course, have aspects of getting with different broadcasting systems, different television broadcasting networks. There's all these people they need to talk to. Crunchyroll and licensing it overseas. There's a lot of things that the production committee is technically doing that he had to take upon himself in order to do that as a 100% investment for Chainsaw Man. But he still seems positive in the idea that he did learn something from it. He says, we don't have the experience. Aniplex and Toho do a lot of productions each season, so they have a lot of data. And we feel very comfortable having a producer with experience in charge. But we're just at the starting point. Just like the quality of our animation, we are challenging ourselves to see how we can close a gap with the top companies in the right division in the shortest possible time. This kind of goes in what he's talked about before. Again, it's another kind of callback there, in the idea that when he realized that how much work it took in order to do Chainsaw Man the way they did it, he realized really quickly that, we don't really want to do that all the time. I don't want to handle all that stuff. That is way too much stuff to handle, and it didn't make us enough money to sort of make it worth it. So instead, what they wanted to do instead was just be able to go to the production committees and ask for more, which is what I've been talking about before. They need to ask for more money for these animation projects. I know that there's tons of studios and they'll find somebody else, but that was his whole thing, was that we need to create enough notoriety that these production committees want us. And when they come to us to say, we want MAPPA to make this, we go, well, if you want MAPPA, then give us more money. The first 100% owned animation production was not an easy task. However, as with the production of Campfire Cooking, which was also 100% funded, I did not know that. I think I might have, but I don't remember. MAPPA has gained a lot of experience and will continue to consider it as an option in the future. So he's not putting 100% production off the table. I will continue to produce various types of works, taking into consideration the works, the situation, and the business development. As I mentioned earlier, the production committee system is not necessarily bad. It reduced risks, and that's the key thing there. It reduced risks, because that was the whole thing with Chainsaw Man. If he did that 100% production and then it flopped, which it didn't, even though everybody wants to claim that because the Blu-ray sales from other sites, not their own site, was bad, it was a success. They made their money back and then some. Again, and I argued at the time, they made a fortune from Crunchyroll. Overseas distribution, they made a fortune. But there was risk, and that's the scary thing. It could have tanked them. The production committee holds the risk when it's from them. But yeah, he says it reduces risks and allows each participating company to take on its own role and utilize its own areas of expertise. To give an example here is a lot of production committees are different groups. There's sometimes TV broadcasters are involved in it. You have music labels. You have figure making companies. Everybody wants to put into that pool for a production committee because they want to produce merchandise or distribute it on their platforms. Everybody's doing their own role in their expertise. Whereas when he was 100%, producing Chainsaw Man, he had to handle all that stuff, merchandise and all that kind of stuff. When we participated in the production committee, we assert what we need to assert, and they respect that. So we don't feel as if we were being bound by any restrictions. Later on in the article, Otsuka says, of course, there are many times where I feel like MAPPA has gained recognition. But branding has no limits. For example, what kind of branding does MAPPA have for people who watch anime in Africa? There may be people that like MAPPA, but we are not approaching them. Even in Southeast Asia, where the population is growing, young people are watching anime. But we don't know what kind of people are enjoying MAPPA's works. I think we can say that we've succeeded in branding only if we can grasp such things as reality and approach them as a company. He's kind of talked about this before, in this idea that one of his fears, just to kind of offset this, just to kind of sidestep this, one of his fears is that he doesn't want to rely on companies like streaming services overseas for their money. That's what I was saying with the whole idea of Chainsaw Man. He didn't sell enough Blu-rays, and he wanted to sell a lot of Blu-rays because he wants to rely on domestic fans to essentially fund their productions. They want the fans to pay the money. They don't want a company to pay them. Crunchyroll is essentially another company they have to rely on for funding, which is not what he wants. He wants to be essentially independent from relying on streaming services and stuff, because he understands that if he relies on another company to pay for every production they do, What if one season they produce something big and Crunchyroll goes under? They're in trouble. They can't rely on that money. They need to rely on their own way of making money. Selling Blu-rays, selling merch, stuff like that. So I think what he's saying here is that idea of creating that recognition that people go to MAPPA. They like MAPPA's stuff. They like MAPPA as a brand, not just they like watching Chainsaw Man on Crunchyroll. And yes, what technically comes from that is things like Ghibli, for example. Whenever you see Studio Ghibli, this movie is made by Studio Ghibli, you know what it is. You're like, that's Spirited Away. I gotta watch that. There's a brand recognition from a studio itself. He goes on to say, we started out as a late-night animation and movie company, so we will continue to cherish the fans in those works. But I believe that we've begun to compete to create more popular global works. We don't have that level of original work, but we can't afford to say it's not going to be easy to break into that market. If we are a manufacturing company, we have to face the situation and aim for it. Up until now, MAPPA has focused on works that Maruyama and I enjoy that adults find cool and appealing when they see them. However, there are times where I see a ceiling that says, even if we continue to work at this level for 10 years, MAPPA's maximum value will be somewhere around here. And it's my nature to want to break through that ceiling. I want to continue to take on the challenge of developing the ability to create works and creating the environment necessary to break through that ceiling. That is a very interesting 2 paragraphs. And the idea that he's acknowledging this idea that they want to break out from just being strictly an animation studio that's producing other people's works. Saying that right there, he says, we don't have that level of original work. We're producing other people's stuff. Just producing things that he and Maruyama like that are appealing to adults. Eventually, they're going to hit that ceiling. He understands that there's a market. There's a pool of people that their stuff is appealing to. And if they can't break outside of that barrier and only focus on that, they're never going to succeed to get bigger and bigger. I don't know if he's indicating here that their idea here soon is to break out into other types of films, maybe get into family films, get into other things besides just essentially young adult stuff. I mean, like Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, Hell's Paradise. A lot of this stuff is just young adult focused stuff here. And maybe the idea here is to eventually break out of that or to expand the appeal to other people. That's the 2 routes they technically can take. Either you increase that fan base by making more people a fan of it rather than it just be this pull, or you start to stretch out to other things. Produce things that appeal to a broader audience. Break out from that ceiling. Again, besides the controversies around MAPPA and how much people hate how they treat their animators and how, yeah, you hear about that MAPPA is forcing people to sign NDAs, even though I have yet to find an actual link directly to MAPPA. It's just kind of passing comments people make that I haven't been able to find a connection. Even if they are creating those NDAs, which is crappy, even if they are bad conditions, bad scheduling that's forcing terrible working conditions for people, I understand all that stuff. And again, I'm saddened to see that there's a lot of cases where people continue to work at MAPPA if that's the case. I wish that people would step away from the company. In a lot of cases, people don't have a choice. It's the only way they're going to get recognition. It's the only jobs they can get. Or maybe they have such a passion for the project, they're going to force themselves. Putting aside all that stuff, I still like what this guy is doing. I still like his mindset when it comes to this stuff. You can appreciate what good he's thinking about growing a company outside of the norms, growing it outside of that toxic environment that most all these studios are in. Because like I said earlier, MAPPA isn't the only one overworking people. MAPPA isn't the only one that has bad working conditions. It's just the most popular, thus people are noticing it. My hope has always been, and I had the same hope back when the last interview that I went through, my hope has always been that his mindset here is to break out of that norm, and that at some point we're not going to have anybody speaking out. Not because the NDAs, but that we're not going to get anybody speaking out because they're going to get to a point where they can function kind of like a Kyoto Animation. They're blitzing to this. That's the point he's making here. He's blitzing to that. I want to quickly grow. I want to get big like Kyoto Animation right now. And maybe that is him pushing people a lot. But the hope is that he eventually gets to that point where he can stop pushing people. Get to that point where they're producing one show a year and everybody's comfortable. Now they can produce multiples a year, and that could just be the fact that they have a lot of animators involved. And their production schedules are set to a way that it's not pushing them too hard. But again, I like seeing how he is changing things up. He's breaking the mold of studios. That's what fascinates me about this. But anyhow, that was the interview. So you guys get the full context of the interview itself. Hope you guys enjoy this video. As always, if you did, make sure that like button down below, comment. Let me know what you think of this whole situation. Do you just hate Manabu? Do you just hate MAPPA and how they handle things? Or are you fascinated by this kind of look into possibly somebody breaking the molds, breaking out of the norms that these studios are dealing with? And do you think there's a possibility that it is him essentially trying to bleed people in order to achieve that? Like, do you think this is him growing, hopefully, eventually the point where they can break out of even the bad production schedules? I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. But yeah, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you like this content and you want to support the channel more, have Patreon link, tips, links, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly appreciate everybody does, and y'all take care.